we've been quoting out of a book that we actually on the website, as well as some reading materials that are connected with the series, some of the research we did, and besides the Word. And one of those books is called Emotionally Healthy Church, written by a man named Peter Scazzaro. He's back in the East Coast in the New York area. Here's what he says at the beginning of a chapter. He says, in emotionally healthy churches, people live and lead out of brokenness and humility. They understand that leadership in the kingdom of God is from the bottom up, not a grasping, controlling, or lording it over others. It is leading out of failure and pain, questions and struggles, a serving that lets go. It is a noticeably different way of life from what is commonly modeled in the world and unfortunately in many churches. That's crazy how brokenness is not something that is exalted in our culture. What is exalted is strength and perfection. What is exalted is anything but brokenness. We gravitate towards unbroken people. We want to make those people our heroes, the quarterback or the star or the somebody that we admire because of their beauty and their perfection, their togetherness. When we discover them to be broken, we quickly pull them off the stage, or their tweets go down, or whatever it is. We cease to kind of follow them. And so this morning we're talking about this thing of brokenness. Man, it sounds just sounds messy.
Yeah, it's the thing that it's the place in our lives that we don't want to look. And I just want to go back to the first line of that quote as it talks about brokenness and humility, and say humility is this. It's sometimes I think we get really weirded out by humility. We think, oh, if I said right now, if you're humble and you know it, raise your hand. How many people would raise their hand? So you're not humble, you're prideful? Oh, okay, interesting. Right, we're almost afraid of that word humility. We don't know how to do it, but humility is really simple and it can be done. Humility is being known for who you really are, nothing more and nothing less. You don't have to make yourself less than you are, but you also don't have to try to make yourself more than you are to be loved. This is who I really am. And the brokenness piece is where this comes in, because if we weren't broken, humility would be easy, right? We wouldn't mind being known for who we were if we didn't have any flaws, if we had no cracks in our life, if everything was together, then sure, I'll tell you everything about me. But where you find the brokenness is where you want to hide. And so brokenness looks like this. It comes from the sin that happens to us, it happens around us, and it can happen through us. You hear that? It's not, I think sometimes maybe we can focus on the things that are our own sin that we think of as our own fault, but sometimes brokenness is something that's happened to us. It's the family I grew up in, right? Or Uncle John came home from the war just broken, man. I don't know. There's something wrong. There's a weakness there now that didn't used to be there.
There's an interesting NPR broadcast. It's about 9 minutes long by an author by the name of David Brooks. He's an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. And he's written a book, but in this book and in this interview, he's talking about the brokenness that's found in our culture. And here is this New York Times columnist. He says these words. He says, we need to start using language like sin and redemption if we're going to truly understand what's going on around us in our culture. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he's saying basically. I think it's so interesting that this brokenness is everywhere. It's not just for people in recovery or in church or whatever. This brokenness is across every strata of society. Now, society calls it this. Your therapist would call it if you were divorced, they would call, that's your brokenness. Or if your financial planner would call it bankruptcy. Your psychologist would call it dysfunction. The financial experts would describe you as being poor. So there's these words we describe. You have an addictive personality. What they're describing, those are maybe titles or labels, if you will, but what they are labeling is where we're broken. Now listen, brokenness is not unrighteousness all the time. Remember that here's the thing. It happens to us, around us, or through us. So You have been in a car wreck and you weren't driving. You had nothing to do with the accident, but you suffered because of the accident, because the driver was impaired or the driver wasn't paying attention. So the brokenness of the driver actually made its way over to you in the passenger seat or in the back seat. You still have scars, broken bones or something, right? So your brokenness was no fault of your own. There was some domino effect that happened that actually included you. Some of the brokenness happened so many years ago that we don't even remember that we're broken. But I noticed that your collarbone's a little crooked, right? And it happened, again, through no fault of my own. But sometimes it is through your own fault. Sometimes we bring the brokenness on us through our own selfishness.
So think about each of the words that he used to describe our brokenness, whether it's a broken relationship or bankruptcy or some criminal activity or addiction in our life. It comes by a lot of different names. But aren't each one of those the things that have shame attached to them? And so we hide them. Right? We don't publish in the paper all of our greatest failures. Or think about Thanksgiving time. You look across the table and go, now, Uncle Fred, didn't you go through bankruptcy this year? Tell us about that. What happened with that?
Hey, Bob, you lost 2 jobs this year.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hey, Auntie, now is that your 4th glass of wine? Can we talk about the addiction that I'm seeing here? Let's talk about this for a while.
You've changed.
No, these are the things we don't talk about. These things that we hide. Even imagine it, have you ever been in a job interview lately? What are one of the questions they ask you? Well, what's your greatest weakness? What's the flaw in you? Oh, don't you just love that question? You just can't wait for that question to come around. What do you say? Oh, I care too much,
I work too hard. I'm a workaholic, right?
Yeah. I come too early. I stay too late.
Yeah. Everybody loves me. I'm just overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
Who puts that stuff on their resume, right? Yeah. We don't do that. We
don't go towards those places in honesty. I steal office supplies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got fired from my last 4 jobs.
Yeah.
Punched my last boss.
I hate people. Yeah.
But what we find in Scripture, we're going to go at 2 different stories here. But we're going to start the first one with David, because we all know David's story, right? We're familiar with it. Here's success at the highest level, from shepherd to king, right? From slingshot to giant slayer. This was the man of God, who seemingly could do no wrong. Every battle he went into, he won. And yet there's something lurking in the background, unseen.
So we're going to set the story up quickly and we'll go over it. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit for the sake of time, but it starts in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And this is both a biblical David and a historical David, okay? So in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sends Joab, his general, out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Not unusual, flat roofs, hot climate, evening, cool of the day. And he saw a woman bathing. That wasn't unusual either. The woman was very beautiful, and David sends someone to find out about her. That's not unusual. Kings had the pick of the crop, so to speak, when it came to women. They had that right as an authority figure to take wives, but he sends someone to find out about her. The man comes back and says, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of the soldiers. Then David sent messengers to get her. She comes to him and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness, and she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. Ouch. So David goes into this crisis mode, this damage control mode. And there's not enough time to read the next 20 verses, but if you go and read the story, of course you may know the story. What David does is he begins to figure a way out to cover this. He doesn't want to be discovered. He doesn't want to get caught. He's broken something, and he'd rather not get in trouble for it. He's the king. Interesting, he's the king. So he uses his power. Remember the quote we read at the beginning? Real leadership leads out of the brokenness. In this moment, he begins to go do an end run around his brokenness and use his power to cover himself. And so what he does is he sends word to Joab, and he says, Joab, put this guy, Uriah, in the front line of the battle, where the battle is the thickest. And David's logic is, I want to see the guy killed. I don't want to do it, but I'd like to put him somewhere where he will. And in fact, that's exactly what happens. Uriah is killed. A messenger is sent back to David to bring news. It says in verse 25, and David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. He's just brought the news that Uriah has been killed. David says, the sword devours one as well as another. Now it gets sleazy, because now David uses these platitudes, these what I would call just religious talk. And just, God helps those who help themselves, or the sword devours one as well as another. He knows what's happened. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say all these things to encourage Joab. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And after the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house. And she became his wife and bore him a son. The condemning pieces. But this thing that David had done displeased the Lord.
Think about that. It displeased the Lord. This is the same David that we've known and loved, right? That went from shepherd, that we celebrated his victories, and we read his Psalms, and this guy's just so in love with God. There's nobody been more in love with God than David. And he would sing about and write songs about his love of the law of the Lord. The law of the Lord is my delight. I delight in it day and night. I meditate on it day and night. What did he have to do to get to the place to do this? What did he have to do with the law of the Lord? What did he have to do? What did he have to stop looking at in order to do this? But what we find is a God who loves him too much to let him get away with this. And he sends Nathan the prophet, and we see in 2 Samuel chapter 12, the Lord sent Nathan to David, and when he came to him, he said, and he starts this story. He starts to spin a story for David. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other one poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he'd bought. He raised it, and he grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Can you feel it here?
He's talking to a shepherd.
Yeah. This is David. He understands what it means to put your life on the line for one of these things. Now he goes on. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. So this lands on David's heart full force, and he sees it, and what happens is David burns with anger against the man, and he says to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, this man who did this must die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. You see what's happening here? Our sin looks way uglier on other people. It does. The same thing that we're guilty of, often to a much greater degree. What happened in this story and what David did, this is nothing compared to what David did. But he sees it, it's the exact same sin, but it's on somebody else and it disgusts him. You see the way he had to turn a blind eye to what was happening to do this? And then the righteous indignation that comes forward in this, the religious spirit. Then Nathan says to David, you're the man. You're the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and all Judah. And if this had been too little, I would have given you even more. What's happening here is God starting to describe his heart. David, your heart has been me, I. Listen to me, David. This is what I've done for you. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what's evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. See, he's taking the blood off the Ammonites' hands and he's putting it directly where it belongs, onto the hands of David. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. And there's the car wreck.
Solomon would bear the brunt of that Solomon would be a train wreck in his own right as far as relationships go. Solomon's sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, you can read it there, would be even worse than their father Solomon. And then on it goes. The domino effect down through the generations that we talked about last week is just about to start here. Now there's hope. That's an amazing thing about it, you know. You wonder what was going through David's mind. He could have, even God himself said, David, I would have just given you anything you wanted. Why would you do that? There's a mystery about all that I don't pretend to understand. Why people do what they do. Why I do what I do. Mm-hmm. But I would say, so brokenness, there's 4 reactions. I'm going to put them up real quick to our brokenness. There's when we discover our own brokenness that I think we all have a little bit of a handle on to some degree. We all know what we sort of hide to function, don't we? We all kind of know what we hope no one else knows about us. But our reaction to our brokenness is one is we flee our brokenness. One is we run from it. We just keep moving. We either medicate it, we stay busy, we ignore it, we pour ourselves into something that will keep our minds off of it. But really we're just running from it.
We can fight our brokenness. We can channel that energy, that honest disgust sometimes that we feel into some righteous cause. I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna put my hand to this thing that I am strong at, and just I can't live over there in that. So I'm gonna put my hand to this. And often those are religious things that we turn to. I'm gonna teach, or I'm gonna be up front, or I'm gonna lead, or I'm gonna
take up a cause. Mm-hmm. You know, in 25 plus years of ministry, what I've seen is oftentimes when I have an individual, be it a man or a woman, who's extremely over the top on an issue, I often found that there's something lurking in the background. There's like what I call a whistling in the dark there. In other words, they're compensating. They're huge on this issue. They've taken it on. The issue of pornography, the issue of unrighteousness, the issue of the church is this, or the issue is, some social justice. But oftentimes, there's like this, again, there's this weird sort of a catch in the background somewhere that something is driving that isn't entirely pure.
We hide our brokenness, right? We kind of alluded to this already. The idea that, that's a part of my life that I'm just going to set aside. I'm not going to look at. But hey, look at this picture of me at the gym.
Yeah. This is what drives our social media here.
Yeah. I worked out today. Did I mention I worked out today?
Yeah.
It's a thing I do.
Yeah.
Look at this healthy thing I just ate.
Yeah. Who puts on your face? This is a big, 2 bags of Doritos I just ate. And I'm a slob. Who does that stuff? No one puts that up there.
I don't think there's ever been a time when we've been given such a platform to do this on either. I mean, don't get me wrong, this has always been here. This used to be the Christmas newsletter, right? Christmas newsletter would go out once a year and everything was great. Johnny's doing fantastic in school and Billy's engaged and we're just all doing fine. And meanwhile, they can't sit down to a meal together without screaming and yelling. But the newsletter we send out doesn't say that. Billy dropped out of school. I don't even know where Johnny is.
I heard a guy say this: when we keep people from seeing who we really are, it forms in us a worse version of ourselves. Think about what he's saying here. When we keep people from seeing who we really are, it forms in us a worse version of ourselves. Because now I'm having to manage not who I am, but I'm having to manage who I want you to think that I am. That's a very confusing thing. Anybody here, when you were a kid, your mom would tell you, if you tell one lie, you have to tell another? Or was it just my mom that would do that? God bless my mom. My mom would say that all the time. At first, I didn't understand it. It's like, what? And later in life, I began to realize, wow, that's true. Because the version I'm trying to manage that isn't really me, I have to keep track of who I've showed what to. Mm-hmm. We become a worse version of ourselves.
And I think some of it's just plain selfishness and pride, but some of it is almost like just cultural theory. Like, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Let's just work on the strengths, the things that are going good in our life, and let's try to not look at this other place. But when we hide those things, they run our life. The thing that you hide in shame owns you. You hear me? And you know it's true. And the only way to get free from that thing is to let it out of the closet, bring it out in the open. And that is the very thing that we're afraid of. We're afraid of Nathan and his statement, "You are the man." we point that finger at everyone else going, no, well, what about him, God? Well, what he's no better or. And we're so afraid of that tender, soft piece of brokenness that still hurts. I still get a twinge there when it rains from that car wreck. And we don't want to go back and look at it.
The fourth one is the one we see in our culture prevalent today, is we actually flaunt our brokenness. Hey, I'm from Portland, I'm weird. You got a problem with that? Yeah, it's just the way I am, right? We don't, we're not ashamed anymore. We don't apologize for it. We don't have anything to hide. Actually, we flaunt the brokenness. Now, again, hear me out here. It's kind of like this attitude of, I'm done struggling with it, and I'm done being told it's even wrong. I'm done even describing it as brokenness. It's just part of who I am. It's my personality.
This is the scariest place to be, because what this actually means is I don't feel bad about it anymore. I used to feel bad about this, but now I can't even figure out why I used to feel bad about it. I think it's just okay.
And I don't want you to feel bad about it either.
Yeah, matter of fact, you accept it.
Celebrate it.
Accept me, accept it. And that's scary. There's an old kind of King James word that used to be thrown around a lot more often. It was reprobation. When you're turned over to a reprobate heart, that means you've gone so far down the road of sin that you no longer even really feel bad about where you're at, and you can't figure out your way back. You don't even know why you would want to go back. And the thing that often lets us take that first step into the road of sin is thinking about God's grace. Well, if I could do this and God will forgive me, and he's a gracious God. But what happens is you take a first couple steps down the road of sin, and the sin itself changes you so that you're no longer the person that you used to be at the beginning of that road. You don't really want to go back anymore. It's not that you couldn't come back. You certainly can. But now my heart has been hardened. Now I have a reprobate heart.
We'd like to leave you with the remedy, not just describe the problem, but I'd like you to think about, we're going to leave you with three things here. As we look at, so why? What's the deal? What is God saying to us? One is this, say this slow, make room for weakness in your theology. Make room for weakness in the way you perceive and understand God and yourself. Think about that. In North American Christianity, which is a unique brand of Christianity compared to the rest of the world, weakness is seen as sin. Brokenness is seen as substandard. You've all seen pictures, not to pick on Christian television, but let's do that right now for just a second. You see people on the screen who have perfect hair and perfect teeth and perfect cars and perfect wives and perfect ministries and perfect this, and they all claim it's because they are walking with this God. No one ever mentions their brokenness, very seldom. And I think that's just such a gross misrepresentation of the gospel. If you get around some of the rest of the world where people are living in persecution, people are living in some very difficult environments, and you find the gospel is alive and well, but you don't find this theology of perfect strength. You actually see them living in a place of weakness. And again, it's something in us that we don't gravitate towards weak, we gravitate towards strong and together. But what if the greatest work of all mankind and God was through the weakness of a cross? You think about it, the greatest win in the history of mankind came through the weakness of a Roman cross. The Roman cross didn't argue with people. It just won every battle it ever fought. No one ever beat a Roman cross. When a Roman cross was done, you were dead and it was on to another day. So in weakness, the Savior of the world, the God of the world, becomes flesh and takes on the Roman cross and loses. But by losing, we win. That's amazing when you think about it. That weakness somehow is wrapped up in the character and the revelation of God to us. Francis Spufford is an English author. He says this: if you won't hear the bad news about yourself, you can't know yourself. You condemn yourself to the maintenance of an exhausting illusion, a false front to yourself which keeps out doubt, and with it hope, change, nourishment, breath, and life. If you can't hear the bad news, you can't begin to hear the good news about yourself. Isn't that amazing what he's saying? He's saying that by recognizing and embracing weakness in ourselves, we begin to truly know ourselves, and then we begin to truly know God. That's how it was designed. That goes back to this humility part. God gives grace to the humble. and he resists the proud. You know, if I said here, hey, just take a couple minutes right now as the worship team just plays softly and turn to the person next to you and share your greatest weakness, share your two greatest failures with the person on your left and your right.
The room would clear out.
We'd be heading for the bathrooms. It'd be like, I really got to go. I just like, there's roast is in the oven and they've gone long. And who would do that? Mm-hmm. We don't do that. And it's because we're afraid, I think. I think we're afraid. I think there's this fear of rejection. And I think there's this fear of how we'll be received.
Do you hear the difference here between flaunting our weakness and this? This isn't, I'm just going to, this is me, I'm a sinner, I'll just always live in sin. Romans 6 says, what shall we that have died to sin say? Are we going to continue to live in it? God forbid. So there's a grace that comes for us, but you're never going to receive that grace until you turn towards your brokenness, look at it, confess it, admit it, bring it to Jesus. Let it out of the dark. And suddenly the power that it had over you is broken. And we see this all the time, right? As we submit to one another and open up to one another, we lean in towards that.
The second one is, what if we saw our brokenness as a gift? What if you saw the places that you were broken as a gift to experience and know something you would never have known without that weakness? That's amazing. The Apostle Paul, arguably one of the greatest writers and if you will, greatest Christians of the Bible, who wrote most of the New Testament. Here's what he wrote in 2 Corinthians. He was arguing, they'd gotten into a dispute in the church about who were the greatest apostles, and Paul was just saying, look, because of the extravagance of the revelations, this is out of the Message, Eugene Peterson's take, and so I wouldn't get a big head. I was given the gift of a handicap. That is, AKA a thorn in the flesh. Something was a thorn in Paul's flesh. We don't know what it was, but many writers believe it was literally something, a weakness in his body. It was a thorn in his flesh. We actually use that term now, don't we? Man, my mother-in-law is just my thorn in the flesh. She just knows how to push all my buttons. Or maybe it's someone closer than that, right?
It's Mother's Day. You should have picked
sorry.
father-in-law.
That's awful. But you think about it, you can imagine, you ever had a thorn in your flesh? You ever had a sliver in your hand or somewhere? You're trying to carry on, but it's just throbbing. It's there. Every time you touch it, you feel it. This is what Paul was saying. He said, I can't do anything without feeling this thorn, this weakness, this brokenness in my flesh. And he says, look, I asked the Lord, he says. He said, what it did was it pushed me to my knees. No danger of walking around high and mighty for me. At first, I didn't think of it as a gift. I begged God to remove it 3 times. Lord, take it away. Lord, take it away. I want to be together. I want to be unbroken. I want to be, and the Lord says, no, I'm not going to take it away, Paul. My grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness. Boy. So think about it, my brokenness is actually something that pushes me to my knees. I don't go to my knees in the natural. No, I don't. I wish I'd told you I did, but it's not natural for us. That position to kneel before God in humility and saying, God, I need you, that's not a natural thing to us as men and women. But Paul's saying here, this weakness pushed me to my knees. I wouldn't have gone there any other way, and it's a gift to me. So now, he says, a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. I take limitations and strive with good cheer, those limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks, addictions, etc. You fill in the blank. I let Christ take over. The weaker I get, the stronger I become.
That phrase just rubs us wrong. Handicap as a gift. But think about it. Have you ever heard somebody say, and I bet you have, this cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me? Why is that? What does that mean? Because not everyone says that, but every once in a while you hear someone says, man, this heart attack scare was the best thing that could have happened to me. What are they saying? They're saying, you know what? I was going on in my strength. I was just pushing forward, and I was killing my family. I wasn't doing the things that were important. And it made me stop and look at myself and see what I'd become. And I had to embrace this weakness, and I had to change my entire life. But because I stopped and did that, I'm a new man. I'm not the person I used to be. And this isn't just about this physical. This happens in the emotional, in the spiritual. This is all of us. But if we refuse to do this, then the heart attack is coming. Nathan will come into your life. God loves you too much to let you live this way.
That's where the last one comes in is, what if we were a community where truth and grace carry the day for us? I put those two words there very deliberately, truth and grace. Because a community without truth is just a get-together, feel-good club. It's sloppy living. A community with truth but no grace is just killer. Truth without grace without truth is sentimentalism, and truth without grace is just abuse. It'll just kill us. Mm-hmm. And so David here in Psalm 32 writes a song about his failure. Now we think only Garth Brooks does this kind of stuff, but David did this years ago. He sings about the worst moment of his life. And he doesn't just sing it to sing it. He sings it to be sung. He sings it to be read. Think about this. Yeah. He writes a song that the Psalms were to be sung at other times. So imagine, I wrote a song so you don't forget my dysfunction. Can you imagine this?
Standing in that congregation of people singing about that. Oh yeah, this one's about him.
Yeah.
I wrote a song about you.
Yeah, all together now. I am an adulterer. I am an adulterer. I was a king, but I blew it badly. I mean, can you imagine? Listen to what he writes. Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. He's not talking about some guy out there. Oh yeah, bless that guy, man. He was really screwed up. No, he says this. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against him, and whose spirit is no deceit. And then he goes right to the heart. Man, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning. Day and night, your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped in the heat of summer. His mouth is dry. He said, then I acknowledged my sin, and you did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. And then we sing this, don't we? You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. What other religion would showcase and memorialize one of its greatest heroes' epic failure? What other religion would do that? But see, the religion of grace and truth doesn't ignore truth, what happened, but it doesn't just leave us there bleeding on the pavement until we just bleed out. The religion of grace picks us up, recognizes what's happened, and puts us back together. That's the call of the church, is to be a place of safety and grace and restoration.
Early in ministry for me, as a young guy, I realized I was doing all of this. I was curating my life and trying to make things look just right in ministry and have a persona that made it look like I had it all together. And I'm up here because I belong up here. And so let me tell you, how to get your life together like mine's together. And it started to kill me. I started to feel more and more condemnation. I could relate to this feeling of my bones are wasting away within me. Something like outside might look healthy, but inside I've got a bone sickness. And I had to come to a place in my relationship with God where I said, God, I have to be known for who I really am. If that means I'm only allowed to mow the lawn at church from now on, that's what it means. I'll gladly give up any position, any place that I think I have or should have or deserve in order to be right in relationship with you and the people around me. And that was, I'm not going to lie to you, I'll remember the day. I was on the hardwood floor of our first little house crying for about 2 hours, just weeping before God going, but this sounds terrible. This means talking to people. This means, what about the consequences of this? I had to get to the place where the consequences of not doing it hurt more than the consequences of living in shame, hiding it.
A community that will walk in this has incredible potential.
Yeah.
You being part of this community and engaging this in reality, the where you really live, has incredible potential to transform your life. I want to say to you this morning, if you're stuck, there's ample opportunity around here to engage, but you have to make that move. No one's going to force you into being open, because if someone's forcing me, then I'm just going to make something up. You know, I'm going to finish with the last story. It's just very brief, but it's the story of the New Testament character. And this story the guy doesn't really have a name. We just know him, we know him as the prodigal son. The story that's found in Luke chapter 15 is the story of a young man who goes to his father. We all know it, but he goes to his father and says, "Dad, I want my inheritance now. I don't want to wait till you die." In that culture, in that Middle Eastern culture back in that day, literally what that young man was saying is, "I wish you were dead. I wish you'd hurry up and die, because I want the money that I know is going to be mine, because I want to go and spend it." The father, in graciousness, gives the son. He didn't have to, but he gives that younger son the money that would be his when he died. That younger son, we know the story, takes off. He flies off into who knows where land, clubland, and spends the money on wine and women and song, and all of a sudden finds himself one day, what? Broken. He's literally broke. He's lost. But I want to tell you something. Listen as we finish. He's lost on 3 levels. First of all, he's lost to God. Second of all, he's lost to his father. And last of all, the worst part is he's lost to himself. See, that's the sons and the daughters of Adam. We're lost to God. We're lost to each other. And we're lost worst of all, to ourselves. And listen to his words. When he came to his senses, he said, "Man, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will go back to my father and say, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you, and I'm not even longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me a slave. Just make me a hired hand.'" That's how deep that stuff goes, man. This isn't just some self-help idea here. This is a condition of humankind. And the father, while he was a long way off, sees him and filled with compassion, runs to his son, throws his arm around him and kisses him. And the son said, "Father," he just goes through this rehearsed speech. The father said, No. Bring the best robe, put it on, put a ring on the finger and sandals on the feet. Bring the fattened calf. We're going to have a feast. We're going to dance and we're going to celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they begin to celebrate. A painter by the name of Rembrandt painted a picture, one of the last things he did in his life, called The Return of the Prodigal Son. That painting is still on display. And in that picture, it's painted deliberately with a dark background because the artist wanted to focus, wanted us to see something. There's actually a half a dozen people in the original painting, but 3 of them are in the shadows. One is supposedly his mother, the other is a servant, and the other would be kind of the accountant of the family, it's told. But the 3 whose lights shine in their faces are very distinctly, unmistakably there for a reason. One is the son. Look at the son who's kneeling, who's missing a shoe, whose clothes are tattered, and he's lost his hair. He's battered. He's broken. He is broken. And he kneels before the Father. Look at the Father. Just the face of compassion, the hands on him, the left and the right hand on the shoulders and the back. Remember the words of the Father, "This my son who was lost has been found. Come on, let's celebrate." And of course, the third character is that one on the right with his hands folded, who didn't sin, who didn't make any mistakes. He's the older son. He's the one who had it all together, the one who didn't waste his father's money, the one who didn't make any mistakes. But I want to suggest to you this morning that lostness isn't just the way we would imagine it. I submit to you that the older son was as lost or worse than the younger. When we refuse to celebrate what God has done in the lives of other people, we're the lost son. When we condemn and look down our face at people, oh, I would never fall into that sin, then we're the lost son. When we refuse that the grace of God, to believe the grace of God can cover whatever perversion, whatever thing we've gotten ourselves into, then we become the lost son. We become the older son. And this is the message of the gospel. I believe that was the message of that painting. That man, the Father's mercy extends farther than we would ever imagine.
Guys, every Christian that reads a story tends to put themselves in the place of the prodigal son first. That's great. We are. But I would say the vast majority of the unbelieving outside of these walls, when they think of us, do they think of you as the prodigal or do they think of you as the older? Nobody runs to the older son. I need your help. I'm really broken up, man. No. They want to meet the prodigal who's come home. But somehow in that restoration that we find with our Father, where he puts clean shoes back on our feet and throws a clean robe over us, sometimes we start to try to turn that face to the world. Oh, yeah, that never happened. I'm good. That never happened. Your testimony, your story of brokenness and redemption is the one that's going to change the world. And if you hide it, you're hiding the grace of God. You're hiding God's story of redemption in you. It says in James, confess your faults one to another that all will be well with you. There's something about this community of grace and truth, right? Because they're both happening there. The confession of, I'm telling you what's true about me so that all will be well with you. The grace is there too. I'd love to ask you right now as we go to this song and worship to take time and ask God, where do I start this? What practical step do I take this week? Who do I talk to? In that same passage in James, it's talking about even in our sickness, to go to the elders of the church to have them pray for you. I think there's a piece of that belongs there too. It's not just always with our peers, but who could I go to? Who could I talk to that could maybe hear me, hear my truth, give me grace, and walk with me towards healing, towards restoration?
As we finish, just take a minute. We'll be up at the front if people need prayer here as we finish. Feel free. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up, and pastors or whoever. And yeah, let's just seal the deal here.